What have you dreaded the most when you were in your high schools? Essays. Now, interestingly, essays are not always just something that students have to write. Sometimes they have to study essays by eminent writers. And in fact, essays have become one of the most important genres, especially because you don't get stories, but you get histories out of them. Today, we are going to talk about a very important essay which is prescribed for many UG syllabi and is important for many competitive examinations as well. So don't miss any part of this video as we look into each and every line of Francis Bacon's. Before going into Francis Bacon, let's first understand a little bit about essays. The word basically came from a word which means to attempt something. And if you look at history, the first person who popularized this form of writing was MPhil de Motta, who did so during the 16th century. Now, MPhil de Motta used to write anecdotes, short little writings, where he often digressed into personal communication with the readers. But he kind of gave shape to what we now know as the essay. Essays may be seen as personal ones or impersonal ones, or they may be a blend of both. We have already covered essay by Charles Lamb, Dream Children, and if you have watched that video, you know what personal essay means. When we look at today's essay of studies, we will understand what impersonal essays mean. Francis Bacon, he was also known as Lord Verulam. He was an English philosopher and a statesman. In fact, he served as the Attorney General under King James I of England. In his essays, what he does is he tries to prescribe a lifestyle. He tries to groom future princes and rulers who must follow certain codes of nobility, of aristocracy. Therefore, in his essays, we find a lot of advice and prescriptions which one must follow in order to achieve erudition, success, and such things. But he doesn't talk about his personal emotions, his anxieties, things like depression, things which we get in the essays by Charles Lamb. Although you might feel that, okay, then we won't be enjoying his writing much. Let me tell you one thing, that it is my experience as a student when I was in college. I used to feel more comfortable with Bacon's essay than dealing with Charles Lamb, especially when it came to exams. So if you are preparing for your exams, you will have to take this essay up because it's going to give you a lot of marks as well, because this person is very focused, objective, and he gives out his points in a very formal manner, which is very easy to remember when you are appearing for a test. When Bacon first published his essays, he published 10 essays, and it was in 1597. There were subsequent publications. He went on adding more essays and republishing the book, and he published it again in 1612 with 38 essays, and finally when he published it again in 1625, it had a massive 58 essays. Of Studies belongs to the first publication itself. When you look at this essay of Studies, you will see that he uses short sentences mostly, and he uses a very interesting strategy. He uses a tripartite structure where the sentences may be divided into 3 parts, and the following 3 sentences are elaboration of each part. When we will go through the text, you will understand what I am saying. Studies serve for delight, for ornament, and for ability. So he begins straight away talking about the main topic here. This essay is going to be about studies. what one should study and how one should study it. So, the first thing that it tells us is the purpose of study, why we should study. That is for delight, for ornament, and for ability. So, you have a three-part structure or a three-part sentence which he is going to elaborate in the subsequent sentences. The second sentence is now an elaboration. Their chief use for delight is in privateness and retiring. Privateness is when you have some me time, when you spend some time alone. Retiring doesn't mean when you get old and retire from your job. Retiring means again when at the end of the day you're taking a break from work and you are trying to take a breath and relax. That is your time of retiring. So, during privateness and retiring, we understand the delight of study. For ornament is in discourse. When do we understand the value of study as ornament? What is ornament? Ornament is when you add a kind of additional beauty to something. Study's purpose as ornament is served when it is used in discourse. Discourse means any kind of lecture that is given, any kind of conference that we have. So, in formal speech, discourse is formal speech. It can be written, it can be spoken. Discourse means when you talk at length about something with some kind of educational knowledge or educated knowledge. So, your study will add beauty to whatever you write or whatever you speak. It will add vocabulary, it will add matter, it will add expression. So, more studied you are, more ornamental your expressions will become. The third point is ability. And for ability is in the judgment and disposition of business. You're leading a life, you are going on about your business, but if you are studied and well read, then you will be able to have a good judgment. You will be a better judge of character, you'll be a better judge of situations. So, this is how study is going to help us. First, it will be serving us as a thing of delight, maybe when you are reading a storybook. Then it will help you become more ornamental in your expressions. And the third part is it will make you more capable of applying judgment and wisdom to your daily life. Now he comes to the second point. For expert men can execute and perhaps judge of particulars one by one. But the general counsels and the plots and marshalling of affairs come best from those that are learned. So he is talking about two kinds of men here, expert men and learned men. And what is the difference? Expert men are those who have some kind of knowledge about particulars. Maybe they are trained in one kind of job, maybe they have idea about one kind of software, or they know about one kind of editing. But a learned man in general will be able to understand the general affairs in a more wise way. All right? To spend too much time in studies is sloth. To use them too much for ornament is affectation. To make judgment wholly by their rules is the humor of a scholar. Interestingly, he gives out in the very first sentence 3 purposes of study. And then in this sentence, he is telling us, is warning us that if you use your study too much for any particular purpose, then that will be actually a fault or it will create a disadvantage. How? See, studies serve for delight, but if you feel that you're enjoying reading so much that you're not doing any other work in the world, then obviously you will become a lazy person. So he says to spend too much time in studies is sloth. So see, he is continuing the tripartite structure where the first part of the first sentence is carried on in this way, that if you overdo delight, then you will end up becoming a lazy person. To use them too much for ornament, second point. If you use too much ornamental speech, what will happen? People will say that this person has a problem. He doesn't know how to communicate in a proper way. He is overusing a lot of words, and he is showing off his learning a lot, and then you get criticized that you are affected. Affectation is like a fault which happens when you try to get influenced a lot. So when any kind of study influences your speech in a bad way, that you lose your basic character, then that becomes an affectation. Again, if you always judge everything based on what you studied in books, okay, that will make you actually less clever or less wise. To make judgment wholly by their rules is the humor of a scholar. So sometimes you hear people say, right, that that person only has bookish ideas, he doesn't have any practical sense. That happens because this person is applying whatever he has studied in books in real life without understanding that practical wisdom is a little bit different from books or what you get from books. So he is trying to prescribe a kind of an equilibrium, a balance. A learner must maintain an equilibrium between studying and other activities, and ornament and argument, theory and practical. So there has to be a balance and an equilibrium. Now he is talking about how study influences a person. They perfect nature and are perfected by experience. So you're getting three things here: study, nature, and experience. Nature is something which you're born with, your innate quality. So you are born with certain qualities which are perfected by studies. And studies are in turn perfected by experience. As I was telling you, that if you apply whatever you learn from books in real life, the more experienced you are, the more you will be able to apply it properly. That's why it is said that studies perfect nature. Whatever is there inside you, that is perfected by study. But studies are perfected by experience. For natural abilities are like natural plants that need pruning. Pruning means pruning, cutting down into shape by study. So natural abilities are like wild plants. They grow in any direction possible. But if you are planning to make a garden out of them, you'll have to cut them into proper shapes and have to prune them. Similarly, if you want to use your natural abilities to serve any purpose in this world, then you have to condition it. You have to trim it up with proper study. All right. And studies themselves do give forth directions too much at large, except they be bounded in by experience. When you start studying on any topic, what happens? You end up going from one Google link to another Google link, and then you feel so overwhelmed that where should I stop? Only an experienced person can tell you which thing you must study, and you also have some experience on your own, because the first time when you start studying something, you are more lost. The more you study that particular thing, the more you get the experience that this has to be my limit, that has to be my expanse. Okay, so studies should be always bound by experience, either by experience of yourself, which you gain by more study, or experience of an expert. So nature plus study plus experience is kind of a recipe for perfection. Crafty men contemn studies. Simple men admire them, and wise men use them. So he is giving us again three kinds of people. One, crafty. Second is simple. Third is wise. Who are the crafty men? Crafty men are kind of people who hate studying, who want to get the easy way out in this world, get the shortcut all the time. They know how to manage things without learning about them. So those are the crafty men, and they do not like studying at all. So crafty men condemn studies. Simple men admire them. Simple are people who are not complicated, who are mostly uneducated people. And at the same time, although they themselves are uneducated, they have extreme admiration for studies, and often it is seen that they want their children to go to school even more than people who are educated themselves. So, this is seen that simple men, often village folks who constitute simple men, they have great admiration for people who are educated, and they have great admiration for their children who pursue education. All right. So, that is simple men for us, and wise men use them. Now, the most important thing that you can do with study is to use them in your life, and only wise men do that. For they teach not their own use, but that is a wisdom without them and above them, won by observation. So when you study maybe a sonnet by Shakespeare, it doesn't have a value in your life as a sonnet, but it is going to create more knowledge in you, so that you will be able to understand more poems, or you'll be able to have an idea about the age in which Shakespeare wrote. So somehow study of a particular thing or an object or any kind of subject is not an end in itself. It is kind of, you can say, what Tennyson wrote in Ulysses. It's an arch where through gleams that untraveled world. So study is going to help you become capable of more study, and your studies can be perfected again by experience. And here he uses a very important word, observation. Read not to contradict and confute. Now he comes to the next part of his essay, where he is telling us why we should study. So the first part was about what the purpose of study is, how study serves us. Second is different kinds of approaches to study, how people react to studying. And the third part is what should we do when we study, after we study something. How should study change us? So he's saying, read not to contradict and confute, not to believe and take for granted, not to find talk and discourse, but to weigh and consider. People often use whatever they have learned. Maybe they have read a short little article which they got on WhatsApp, and they start confronting people. So when you study something, you should not use that study or that reading to simply find talk and contradict people and have a fight with them. Not to believe and take for granted. This is very important. Sometimes we get information over the internet and even in books, which we tend to believe because it is written and published, therefore it must be true. That's not always the case. So he's warning us against information that can come through books, because in those times he didn't have WhatsApp and other stuff like that, thankfully. But it is even more relevant now, that don't just read to believe in something, don't just read to find points for argument. Read to understand. Sometimes read opposing things, so that you will be able to weigh and consider. Weigh means what? When you put weight on any scale and on the other side you put another weight, that is, you're putting two kinds of reading and you're considering. So study should make you more capable of considering things, considering opposite viewpoints. You should not take anything for granted. This is his prescription. So why should we study? We should study to grow our power of judgment. Weigh and consider things. Now, he comes to different kinds of books that can be read. Some books are to be tasted, others to be swallowed, and some few books to be chewed and digested. Again, three kinds separately given. And then he explains. He is using here metaphor where he is comparing books to food. That you have to taste some food, you chew some food, and you simply devour some food. And he is now explaining what kinds of books he is talking about. Some books are to be read only in parts. Parts means, suppose you have a magazine lying around. Will you read in each and every word from that magazine? No. You will read certain parts, the newspapers, the journals which you get, and sometimes even collection of stories. You may or may not like all the stories, so you just read some. So these are the things which you do casually. Just like we taste things casually, We don't use them for nutrition but only for taste. That is the thing which he's talking about here. So he's talking about certain kinds of books which are inferior books, magazines, collection of articles which you read only in parts. That is equivalent to tasting. Now he comes to the second category. Others to be read but not curiously. That means they are to be swallowed without much thinking about it. So chewing is like thinking, all right? So what kind of books are just swallowed? Maybe popular novels, bestsellers, I would say Chetan Bhagat. Something which will not give you much scope of literary analysis and things like that. You simply have a racy story, thrillers, where you want to reach the end, you want to know who killed whom and who done it. So those kinds of books should be swallowed. So they also don't give the kind of mental stimulation which the other kinds of books give, which have to be chewed. Okay. So now he talks about the third kind of books. Some few to be read wholly and with diligence and attention. Macbeth, Paradise Lost, Heart of Darkness, the classics. Because in each and every line, you have so much to think about. It's so thought provoking. So, classics, canonical literature, things which actually make us spend hours poring over analysis of over interpretations, those are the kinds of books which must be chewed and digested, and they provide the greatest nutrition to our body, right? The food which we chew and digest slowly. Similarly, these kinds of books provide the greatest nutrition to our minds, to our brains, to our intellect. And then he talks about a fourth category of books. Some books also may be read by deputy and extracts made of them by others. Now, when you were studying Paradise Lost or say Macbeth, you did not just study the text. Most of you had to take help of some kind of reference book, guidebook, which we say, which assisted you in a way. So this is the deputy he is talking about. So deputy may or may not be a person. Deputy, when it's a person, it's a tutor, okay, a guide who will help you understand the text, or an actual guidebook where summaries are provided, synopsis is given, but he is warning us against that. See, even he knows that in 21st century we will have chat gpt who will be giving us the synopsis of Heart of Darkness, and he wants us so many years, so many centuries. He was really a prophet. And he says, some books also may be read by deputy and extracts made of them by others, but that would be only in the less important arguments and in the meaner sort of books. Else, distilled books are like common distilled waters, flashy things. Have you ever tasted distilled water? It's horrible. Whatever taste is there in water is because of the minerals that are present, and in distilled water, gone. Similarly, if you make a summary of Rape of the Lock, gone. You don't get anything. You don't get humor, you don't get wit, you get nothing. You only get distilled product, and tasteless, in a way worthless. So Bacon tells that there are different kinds of books, and we should be aware of how much we should depend on what. Now he comes towards the final part, that what happens after we study. And when you study, it is not just reading a book. Studying is not just about reading. There are three aspects to it: reading, writing, and conversation or conferring. So, three things constitute complete education. Reading maketh a full man, conference a ready man, and writing an exact man. So, he is categorizing study into three parts: reading, conferencing, and writing. you all know that you gain complete confidence on any piece of literature that is prescribed in your syllabus or any subject or any topic only after you write an article on it, you write question answers on it, and if you write it on your own, you have so much more confidence. This is what he's talking about. And we also gain confidence how if we discuss about that topic better in a formal situation like a conference. Conference doesn't always have to be an inter-college seminar. It can be something like where you discuss things with your teacher in your class. So, what are the advantages? If you read, you are filled with knowledge. So, reading makes a full man. Conference, a ready man. If you talk and you converse with your teacher, with your peers, with your classmates, or with your colleagues when you are already in job, then what happens? Your conversation on any particular topic will make you more ready, so that next time somebody asks a question, if you have already had a conference with somebody on it, then you will be able to answer the man promptly. And writing, an exact man. So finally, when you write, then you know exact precise points about that topic, because when we write answers, we try to stick to the topic, we try to organize the material, okay, in a more scientific way, in a more logical way, in a more precise way. Therefore, the more you write, the more exact you become, and then you don't digress here and there. And therefore, now he is using a little bit of a humor here. And therefore, if a man write little, now suppose you are a person who doesn't have the habit of writing, you say that I don't want to write, I don't like writing much. Then, in order to compensate for that, what you should do, what should be there in you? He had need have a great memory. Then he's actually trying to say that if we write a lot on any topic, then that will help us memorize things. It happens to all of us. If you write an answer over a number of times, then in the exam you are more confident because you already have those points in your memory, you have written about them. If we confer little, now you're a person who is so shy, who doesn't want to talk with anybody about anything, and you are not just a person who is a very social kind of a person. So what will happen? You won't be able to confer with people on any topic, and then suddenly one fine day you face a job interview and somebody asks you a question on which you have not talked with anybody. Then how will you manage? You can manage only if you have a particular thing. He had need have a present wit. Then you should be very, very witty, so that you can on spot answer something, even if you have not talked about it with anybody. Okay. And the third thing, if he read little, he had need have much cunning. Now, if you don't do the basic thing, writing is important, conferring is important, but the basic thing is reading. Now, suppose you don't want to read, there is a solution to it. Bacon is giving you a solution even when you don't want to read. Solution is you should be very, very clever, very, very cunning, so that in that interview board, you should be able to fool them, convince them that you already know something which you don't know at all. Do you have that in you? If you don't have that in you, you'll have to study, you'll have to read, and this is basically a roundabout way of saying that there is no shortcut. Because, okay, you might end up having the job, convincing them that you know something which you don't know. But in that job, you have to do that thing every day. So, ultimately, you will not have much job satisfaction if you are getting it by this cunning and not by actual study. So, the road to perfection is reading, conferencing, writing. Now, after this, he finally gives us a list of things that we should study and what kind of subject has what kind of effect on people. He actually says that studying one kind of subject will make you one kind of person. Suppose you study history. Now he starts like this. Histories make men wise, So now he is giving us a list. So here we have a long list where he is associating one subject with one trait which is developed in humans when they study that subject. Histories make men wise. Histories means when you learn about what went before today, whatever went in the past, obviously it makes you very wise. Poets witty. Poets here means poetry. Now, you might have a question in your mind that how come reading poetry will make us witty? You have to look at the timeline again. When is this man writing? This man is writing when we had the metaphysical poets. Metaphysical poets who emphasized on the importance of wit. What is wit? Clever handling of words to generate either a humorous or a surprising reaction from your readers or listeners. So, associating poetry with wit is a very age specific thing for Bacon. It was during his time when poetry was actually associated with wit. If he was writing during the Romantic period, he would have associated poetry with imagination, that reading poetry makes you imaginative. But no, during the metaphysical age, he was saying that poetry study will make you witty, because once you understand the poetry by John Donne and Marvell and people like them, then you will be able to understand what wit is. We also have witty poets later on during the neoclassical period, such as, okay, write that down in the comment section. Who is the master of witty poetry during the neoclassical age? Write what you think about it. Okay, I'll be waiting for your comments here. The mathematics subtle. Mathematics will make you very subtle. You will be able to understand difference between very small things, because mathematics will involve a lot of precision which you need to be a subtle person. Subtle means somebody who knows the difference between two quantities which normal people find similar. All right. So, if you study mathematics, you will become very subtle. Natural philosophy deep. Now, here by natural philosophy, he basically means science. But again, you might say philosophy in general also increases depth of a person. If you study, science is also a philosophy, isn't it? So, when you study that, you become deep. You become thoughtful about things. You don't pass judgments too quickly. Moral grave. If you study religious stuff, moral things, then you become a serious person, don't you? So it increases your gravity. Logic and rhetoric able to contend. When you study logic, many of you had philosophy in your minor papers or general papers, so you know what logic means. When you study logic and you study rhetoric is something which you study in your UG course itself, the art of using expressions and words in literature, that is rhetoric, in any kind of speech too. So when you know these things, when you study logic and rhetoric, then you'll be able to contend. Contend means to argue something. Okay, you can become a very good speaker and you will be invited as a person on some TV panel, right? Arguing about what's wrong with this country. Qualities developed by subjects. That is the focus of this part of the essay. And then he gives a very interesting line. Abiun studia in mores. I hope I pronounced it all right. Abiun studia in mores is an expression from Ovid. It basically means studies pass into and influence manners. How we behave, how we talk, how we think. Those things are influenced by study. Alright, so remember the meaning of this expression, Abiun studia in mores, which means studies pass into character. Studies pass into our character and influence our manners. Nay, there is no stunt or impediment in the wit. but may be wrought out by fit studies. So, studies are like medicines. So, he's saying that sometimes we can have a disease in our intellect, just like we have disease in the body. And for disease in the body, what do? We have a certain kind of exercise for that. We also have medicines for that, but it is better to cure yourself through exercise and yoga. And he says that just like our bodies are cured, certain diseases are cured by certain exercises, certain problems in our intellect can be cured by certain kinds of study. So here he is actually becoming like a physician prescribing medicines to us. All right. So this is a simile which he uses here, where he is comparing studies to exercises and impediment in the wit, that is, shortfalling in the wit, something which is lacking in our intellectual development, that is compared to an actual physical disease. And then he explains his point and he gives us certain examples. Bowling is good for the stone and reins. Reins means the entire renal system, that is the kidneys. So if somebody practices bowling, then that is good for kidney in general. Shooting for the lungs and breast. The second exercise which he recommends is shooting. Who should practice it? Who have any problem with their respiratory system, their lungs and breast. So for your heart, for your lungs, you should practice shooting, not film. You have to be an archer, that shooting. Okay, so that will exercise your lungs in a good way. Gentle walking for the stomach. This we all know. If you are not feeling well after having a very full lunch or dinner, you go for a walk and you feel better. So gentle walking is obviously good for the stomach. Riding is good for the head. If you're having a headache or migraine, if you're feeling drowsy, just take a long drive, get on a local train, sit on the window seat, and it will create a difference. The rushing wind will make you feel better. He is obviously talking about horse riding, but we don't get horses readily nowadays. So we have to take some other kind of riding here. Whatever it is, riding which involves a movement through wind, that obviously improves the condition of your head if you are having a headache and the like. So he is giving us these prescriptions, and then he is saying, so if a man's wit be wandering. Now suppose a person during the childhood has the problem of short attention span. The child cannot focus on something over a longer period. This can happen. These are the children who have some kind of learning disability. I wouldn't say disability, I would say learning challenge. There are children who can be very, very hyperactive and they cannot sit down and stay focused for over 5 minutes. So, what should a person like that study? He says that person should study mathematics. And why does he say that? For in demonstrations, if his wit be called away never so little, wit means attention. If the person who is doing any kind of mathematical, is solving any kind of mathematical problem, and he has his attention wavering away to some place else, then what will happen? He will have to do the whole thing again. And the more he is facing this problem, the more he'll try to stay focused to avoid redoing it. And that will eventually cure his problem of short attention span. So if a man's wit be wandering, let him study the mathematics. For in demonstrations, if his wit be called away never so little, he must begin again. If his wit be not apt to distinguish or find differences, let him study the schoolmen. If a person is there who doesn't have much sense about differences between arguments, there are people who do not have that ability to distinguish between very fine line of arguments. What should he study? He should study the schoolmen. Now, these schoolmen, they were scholastic philosophers and medieval Christian theologians. All right. So they used to write these very heavy books where they used to talk and argue over points in a very meticulous manner. And therefore, if one studies them, it's like grammar books. Okay. So you will have to be very careful about minute differences. For example, in grammar, what is the difference between phrase and clause? Very minute difference, but you should be careful about that. So, if you study schoolmen, then this power of distinguishing or finding differences, this will improve. For they are simini sectores. Simini sectores literally means hair splitters. Hair has very small diameter. Somebody who splits hair is somebody who really knows to make differences between things. So they are very minute in their work, these schoolmen. So if you study their work, you study their books, then obviously you will be able to become a simini sectores like them. This is another expression which you should remember when you are preparing for your exams. If he be not apt to beat over matters, somebody who is not very argumentative, who doesn't know how to establish his point. This happens to many kids in school, that they don't know how to express themselves and convince others about things. And what should they do? They should study the law. And to call up one thing to prove and illustrate another, let him study the lawyer's cases. So every defect of the mind may have a special receipt. This is very, very interesting prescription. Now, in real life, suppose you are a student who has passed his higher secondary exam, that is, you have passed your high school, and if you are a person whose wit is wandering, would you actually invest in a mathematics honors course? No. You will go for something like English honors, where you think that, okay, I have a wandering wit, so I can't focus on these numbers and digits. I would rather focus on poems and fancy little things. And that will actually make you worse, because you are not curing your lack of focus. So Bacon is saying that always go for subjects which are not suitable for your brain. Why? Because your brain does not want to change itself. But you should actually study contrary to that, so that you cure yourself. Like medicines are always bitter to taste. Okay, so he is saying don't study what you enjoy, study what will be useful to change you into a better person. Now, there's an important reason why he is saying this. He is not talking to, or he is not writing to students who will be appearing for any job interview. He is not writing for 21st century job seekers, right? He is talking to, or he is writing for nobility, the prince, the future king of England, the future baron of England. Okay, so he is talking to people who already have a lot of money. They have no problem establishing themselves, right? They are already established. They belong to the highest rung of society. He is trying to groom these people into a more socially acceptable people, or socially acceptable type of person who has knowledge about everything and whose mind is conditioned by the requirements of the society. So Bacon's prescriptions apply to the nobility more than they apply to us now, where what do we say now? We say that if a person has talent for something, then let that person study that thing. And if he doesn't want to do something in life, then don't force him. That is what we say. Modern education is about that. So he is definitely not talking in those lines, because his target audience or target readers are definitely different. So just to wrap this session, the structure of the essay is what? First, we had 3 important uses of studies, the effect of excessive studies, different people's attitude towards studies, real methods of studies, how you should study, classification of books, and benefits of studies and prescription for studies. So these are the rough points on which he develops, and he is very meticulous about how he develops these points. He doesn't talk any nonsense anywhere, doesn't digress anywhere, and he doesn't talk about himself at all. But still, we think that although we do not have any direct content on his emotions, on his personal feelings in this essay, we do understand a little bit about Francis Bacon from this essay. One, he was an aphoristic writer. Aphorisms means a set of proverbs or sentences which end up becoming proverbial. So aphorisms are something which you associate with Francis Bacon. So he is aphoristic, he is objective, and he is very focused on the topic on which he is writing. Another thing you might say, that why is he using only man and men as his target audience? Again, because of the condition of society, the kind of readers of his essays were future kings and barons and noblemen. They were not the women kind, because women were not given the access to education and training. Elizabeth, the Queen Elizabeth, was definitely a great exception, but education, training for the future, these things were limited to only one gender, that is the male gender. So we only see him talking about men and how men should improve themselves. But again, the word man is gender neutral in a way too, because man is a short form of human and you can treat it like that. Alright, so in that way, I wouldn't call him a patriarchal person, but he was only being realistic and he was talking about the situation he saw around him. His topics mostly were politics, religion, science, and philosophy, and people often call him the father of modern English essays. So I hope you have enjoyed this short and no nonsense piece by Francis Bacon. If you have any other work by Bacon in your syllabus, do let me know in the comment section, and also write what other things you want us to make videos on, and we will try our best to meet your requirements. But we also apologize for the videos we are not able to make, because we are only human beings and time is definitely a constraint for us all. So thank you all for being with us today. I hope to find you soon in my next video. Till then, stay happy, stay subscribed. This is Monami Mukherjee signing off.